Just to give you a sense, so like all of the stuff that Jon's going through, we're going to run the system. So you don't have to worry about like all of the mechanics. And what I want to just show you is the part of the UI that you will be engaging in with the most. And I say the most, it's actually not very much either. It's, I don't know, maybe like an hour a quarter would be sort of a typical kind of review time. It varies depending on how these things turn over and so on, but this will show you a couple things. One, it shows you how tokens and templates work, which start to give you a sense of just like what it's doing and how it does that. And then number two, this is literally the thing you will see. And I'll go through that to explain like what it looks like, what, you'll have to do on your end and so on. So first thing to notice is, you notice this is just headlines. Like you're not looking at ads. You're not looking at anything fully composed. This is all headlines that have been approved. You can even see a few here on the bottom that have yet to be approved. So those are new. Next round, when we submit them, there'll be some new ones in there for him to look at, but this also grows over time. So it's not like day one, you're going to get 8,000 headlines that you have to go through. It's set up like, again, you can see it like new stuff comes in and it'll just fill in. And then occasionally it's okay, let's push it again for review. And then what the system's going to do is, first off, this is all unique headlines. So a simple way of thinking about it, or a simple analogy, you can almost think of this as like a mega RSA, right? Where an RSA is 15 headlines, this is even more than that. And what it's going to be doing now is once these all get approved, you can think of that as like whitelisting ad parts. It'll actually compose the ads by sort of remixing all the different pieces. It'll try out new ones. It might take two from that have been tried out in different templates and try and put them together. But the reason it shows you this is I often would say, I feel like we put almost as much thought into this review portal and making it sort of human scalable or human readable as we did in just building the system out. And the reason for that is, first off, you can see here, I have this one headline highlighted, and you can see there's some sort of variable looking things in there. Those are the tokens. Those are placed, the values for those tokens are placed based on, there's like a logic on the back end, and it can work off of what are the keywords, what are the ad group names, what are the campaign names. So there's a lot of levels of control here of like, oh, in this ad group or this campaign, it's going to fill in with this value. So for example, over here on the right, you can see all of the different combinations that this creates across all the different ad groups. So for example, this top one, compare Buick sales, surely that's in some sort of Buick campaign. I don't know if that's keying off of the campaign or the keyword. It kind of doesn't matter. It's just set up to make sure it goes in the right spot. Sales, I don't know what that's keying off of. It does more than just fill in, oh, the keyword says sales, so we're going to put sales in the ad copy. It could be, filling in for Buick dealers near me. I don't know exactly what the mapping is. I mean, we could go look, but the general point is some of these will be one-to-one, right? So like Buick, it says Buick because it's a Buick keyword. It could also, though, I don't know a Buick model off the top of my head. So maybe Ford, let's do Ford. I know those better. It might fill in Ford because it says the keyword says F-150, right? Like it doesn't literally have to say Ford. Or for Chevy, it might say, Silverado, not literally Chevy or Chevrolet. And so it's going to fill those in. It will line up with the keywords, but also it might line up with, for example, if someone, maybe a keyword was, near me, it might fill in with like convenient or, in your area. The point is just that it's not one-to-one. And as you can tell, just this one headline creates, I have no idea how many variants this is, but it's a lot. And so again, the whole part about making this sort of human readable is you can see very quickly, even if all I did was put together a couple ETAs with these, so 3 headlines, 2 descriptions, already you're going to have hundreds of ads just from the tokens filling in. But that only gets multiplied because of all of the combinatorics of the fact that it will recombine these, right? So if you think about all the combinations on top of just even without the combinations, it's sort of a staggering amount of variance you would have to look at. That's what I mean by making this human readable. So how do we then take what the software wants, which is, like hundreds of millions of different combinations of things that it could use, and make it so that it's human reviewable. So you can be sure that it's not putting crazy stuff in your account or stuff that's non-compliant. And that's what this setup is. So this setup, you'll see all these green thumbs here. That means these are all already approved. You can see this little button at the top, create customer URL. If I hit that, it gives me a URL, it gives me a passcode. I send it over to you. You click it, you'll come in. This is what you'll see. Because these are approved, you don't have to go back. So it would just show you those 3 at the bottom where I was like, oh, look, there's new ones in here. That's cool. So you just see the new stuff. Once it's approved, it's whitelisted. You can also comment it and say, hey, this would be fine, except for you can't say exclusives. Can we get rid of just that? Or, whatever it is that you have feedback on, or, just hard disapproval. They're over by the door. And so the goal here is, one, if you look on the right, even though it's a lot of combinations, it's not like you need to read every single one, right? You're like, oh yeah, Buick, sales, prices, specials, rebates, incentives, offers, exclusives, that's fine. And then obviously it's, all the different makes. So you can kind of get a sense of like, oh, I see what it's doing. That's fine. You don't have to literally look at every single one. And then you should be able to work your way through these relatively quickly, and just kind of zip your way down, through the list here in a pretty quick way. And like I said, my sense, and I've asked a lot of our customers about this, my sense is it's maybe an hour to go through it, even though it looks like a lot. And again, it won't be exactly this many. To start, it's usually, 20 or something, right? Which itself already creates a ton of different ads. Same thing here with the descriptions. You're going to get the exact same, kind of setup. So it's relatively easy. It's designed to be very usable and user-friendly. And again, I often think of this as sort of like, how do we get like machine level scale outputs in like a human scale, human readable kind of format, to make it easy. So you're not just drowning in ad parts. Once these are approved, there's nothing you have to do. The system's just going to automatically do these on an ongoing basis. And the way that works, just to make this really clear, and you may have picked up, again, that webinar, if you watched it, it's much more abstract. It's like, here's how the system works and what you need to do about it. It's not the literal implementation. So the literal implementation here, what it's going to do is, I like to think of it as like a steady drip, drip, drip of ads. So we've done a whole lot of research of like what the dynamics look like when you put new ads in. So it'll try out a couple new ones. It usually won't try out more than like 3 or 4. So it's not going to blast 20 ads in all at once. Instead, it's going to be 2 templates get deployed here. The learning cycle is going to run. That usually takes about 2 to 3 days before it sort of is all decided, until it comes back to sort of some sort of stable equilibrium. Then maybe, the next week or later that week, it's going to deploy a couple more. And first it deploys this stuff everywhere. And then there's another component to this where there's a pausing algorithm that goes in and it pauses the underperformers, and that operates at an ad group level. So it's very like this part you couldn't even do like on a human level. And I've looked at the outputs and they're kind of dumbfounding, because you're like, why is it pausing this ad in this ad group? You don't need to worry about it. That is more or less like, I think of that almost as like cleaning up behind ourselves. And then over time, as those accumulate, right, your ad groups are going to be full of all these old paused things all over the place. And they're going to be different, right? Like in ad group 1, maybe template, 3, 7, and 12 are the ones that seem to be doing really well. Ad group 2, it might be templates 1, 8, and 19, or, whatever. So you kind of get all of that customization by the system just evolving organically. And then of course that creates a massive paused ads. So then we have what I call the Zamboni, which is another piece of software that basically will come through and remove stuff that's just been accumulating, that's been paused for some amount of time.
And I just want to point out too, it's really important that, you try not to fight that and go down the rabbit hole of like second guessing the algorithms. It's one of the reasons it's so important to speak like software to software. Vim, I know in some of the former calls, I think I showed you like with AutoWeb, and it smooths out, like the performance becomes forecastable and predictable. There were 2 other examples. One was a big affiliate that we work with. And we deploy an ad template and they think it creates this incrementality. And the reality was like, and then we paused it to show that we could push the ad somewhere else. I think we actually went over that example in the webinar. It's a really good example of like, they thought that the algorithms wasn't doing the right thing because they didn't even know the traffic was actually coming from another ad group. They already had it. They were confusing like, correlation with causation. Then the very next example was the JG Wentworth one, where, you have 2 ads, one's performing worse than the other, and they're going, your pausing algorithm's not very smart. It's actually the human wasn't very smart. The pausing algorithm identified these are two different cohorts. The only relevant question is, are they producing traffic that's performing within your KPIs? If so, then the pausing algorithm wouldn't. And so all they did by pausing that was lose the incremental traffic. That is why you don't want to kind of get humans in the business of trying to untie the algorithm's shoes. Like we don't understand it.
It's funny, John, that you say that, because obviously in the webinar, I didn't say this, but both of those case studies that I highlighted, both of those we did to prove a point, because people are like, how do we know that this is doing the right thing? We're like, all right, fine. You think you can outsmart it. Let's see what happens and try. And
every time I've seen it fought, it's been the human was wrong.
Right.
Quick question for you. It's a little bit more practical. So for us, right, a lot of our actual metrics that we care about, they're all going to be on the back end, you know. And so for the ad, obviously the ad copy piece is huge. Just practically speaking, like how would we be able to differentiate which ad is which, or which one's working, and what to keep on and off? Because you know, we won't be able to give you the data till after the fact. So it's like, okay, look, you know, these ads are performing really, really well or whatever. And then on the back end, it's like, well, we're not seeing, you know, that high level candidate that we're looking for, or maybe in Paula's case would be, you know, we're not getting any leads or whatever. So it's just like, okay, how's the system going to be able to match that up with the data that we send you so that, you know, it's matching correctly and you're optimizing correctly?
Hey, Kyle, do you mind actually if you could pull AutoWeb back up? Because you have a great example of like distressed and non-distressed that I want to kind of speak to, but it's a great point, Vim. So the way that I think about it from like a logic perspective is like, based on what you have in Google, we should be able to do a better job than any kind of manual alternative. We would love to have access to that data. And one of the questions I'd have is, do you tie it back to like a keyword level? Like, how can you actually like, you know, tie it back to the performance of individual ads? And then the part about the distressed and non-distressed, Kyle, was just about how once we start to understand linguistically, like what quality is, like what you're actually optimizing for. And we have a lot of clients like that. We have, you know, Quicken Loans, I think, has up to a 60-day like click to conversion window, because a mortgage application can take so long to actually process and what actually converted. And so we deal with that a lot. It's just like, how do we access the data? How can you tie it back to performance, to keywords, to ads, things like that? And then also like you can use the ad copy itself to target traffic based on its intent and help you hone in on the best performing down funnel stuff.
And I think I know what you wanted here, John. This one, to get this clean, like this is sort of a, not sure exactly where it is, but I actually have a better illustration of, I think, what you're getting at in this exact account that I can show. So the point John was making is, in this account, you see this distress and non-distress. What these are basically, it's like these heavy incentives. So a lot of what works in this account is stuff like clearance, end of month blowout, like that kind of stuff. But they don't want that for like luxury cars. Like you don't want to say that for BMW or Mercedes. And so the system splits those. So you can still say like this month's incentives, but you wouldn't say like end of month clearance, you know, everything must go kind of language. So that's what that is.
To me, that's like if you're going for like high-end engineer and you're like, and we'll give you a $25 DoorDash card. Like, that's
right.
Get them, you know, like.
Right. And so that is one way you can control it. And that's how you can control it with ad copy. Now, to your point about, and again, I know we've talked about this a little bit, we need to dig into the details. First off, I'm not too concerned about it. The main reason being, whatever's there in Google, it's going to work against anyways. So there's a very good reason of why you should try and get whatever data you can, because its ad rotation can't see it either. It's just going to do what it does. Now, that being said, clearly there is data that for whatever reason, you may not be able to get into Google. These guys have exactly that scenario. And for them in particular, they're selling leads to car dealers, right? But then of course the car dealer needs to take that lead and actually sell a car off of it. And so this lead quality is always an issue. And it's an issue, I think, across the board for lead gen. I don't think we've had a lead gen partner where some form of this or other doesn't pop up. Now, the problem here is you can't get smart bidding to optimize against that directly. And the reason is, one, there's too big of a time lag. They don't know that for, 45 days, maybe. They do track it back to the G-CLID level, which allows this next thing I'm going to show you. But number two, it actually comes in different from all the different car dealers. Like Ford gives it to them like this, Chevy. And so it's a big mess that they have to like get back in order to actually see like, okay, this thing closed. And that lives in a database that's outside of Google. There is no way that you would get that in and just optimize directly to that if you wanted to. So instead, what we do is you can actually manage that through structure. So do you see here this close rate structure update? I'm gonna have to show you some of the sort of, we're gonna go back behind the scenes in the sausage factory real quick, just to make a quick point, but I'll make this as clear as I can.
And Kyle, this is the example, right, where we took, they had 3 different payout tiers, I think. So if they had like the lowest conversion rate, they would get like the lowest payout, and then they had a mid one and they had a high one. They started when we started our engagement in the lowest, and they ended up, I think, post restructure a month or 2 into all services in the highest. So it was a big differentiator for them in COVID, because as you imagine, not a lot of people, when everything shut down, could go to dealerships. That conversion rate helped them get way more money per lead, which is one of the reasons they got so profitable so quickly.
Yep. So
yeah.
Again, it's okay if your eyes cross looking at this. I'm going to walk you through it so that it's clear. Here's what I want to point out. Do you see this here, this Buick Search OEM HCR? The HCR stands for high close rates. And if you guys can see it, if you look at this, I'm going to minimize this so I can see it myself. If you look at this rule right here, this rule is what defines what keywords are going to go into this campaign. So this is the smart map system. And this is basically like the sort of semantic Boolean logic that's basically saying, oh, if it's this keyword, it goes into the Buick campaign, right? And then this defines like what that is. If you look at those rules, you'll notice those rules are exactly the same as what you see up here at the top. So if you see this, you'll say like, oh, that's the same as the logic below. But then you'll notice there's this big and here. And what this is doing is saying, if it's basically a Buick keyword as defined by those rules, and it has one of these other intents associated with it, whether it's area, rebates, offers, vehicles, Envision, which is like a high close rate model for Buick, buying cost, whatever. All of these were defined by analyzing offline data. So they give us their data from the database, they track it back to the GCLID, and then we run it through our system in the way that we would just like for a lot of our other stuff, and basically say, hey, this is a sale, not a click or a lead or whatever. And then we can go in and look at the close rates across these different themes. And now we break them out. So now they have, and again, this will probably be familiar, but it's basically like tier 1 keywords, tier 2 keyword setup. So they can bid these differently. They can give them more budget. And in some cases, they actually want to do sort of the opposite. So, because different manufacturers care different amounts. So if Buick cares and incentivizes them for the close rates, they can bid more for these and they can make more money that way. If Buick doesn't care, these often tend to be more expensive keywords as well. They might actually bid them down. And so my point is, you can take offline data, understand how it lines up with the keywords and the intents through there, and you can actually solve this problem through structure as well as you could through messaging in the ad copy. So
and when we say a human in the loop, that's a big part.
Right. So there's a few different ways you deal with it. Sort of first order, it's like, well, that's the best anything's going to do in Google no matter what, but that's still not good enough. So then there's ways of layering in all the offline data to bring it back and do all kinds of different things, whether it's through structure or ad copy or what have you.